Big four of new metal. How do we pick a big four of new metal? I think this one is hard because new metal can be so many different things. I guess if you were to classify new metal into a few sentences, it would be um, a hybrid genre of rock that features elements of rapping or industrial or electronic music that tends to have less of a focus on the guitar and more of a focus on the bass and vocals. It probably helps if this band peaked around the late 90s and early 2000s. So yeah, that could be a lot of things, couldn't it? Where do we even start? There were some very, very, very successful new metal bands, and there were a lot of different subgenres of new metal, and there were a lot of different things that were popular around the same time that may have toured with new metal acts. They were kind of new metal adjacent, and you wouldn't really rightfully describe them as new metal. So let's talk about it. I think it would be a disservice to any kind of list like this if you're talking about the big four of new metal without saying Korn. Because if you're talking about new metal, everything derives or at least flows out of Korn, right? Korn had rapping, it had focus on the bass, it had the dark, aggressive tones that most new metal has, and frankly, um, they sold a lot of albums. They made some really good songs, and they're still going today. So they're kind of the godfathers of new metal. They have to be on this list. Korn, absolute rock solid inclusion on this. And from there, it gets a little murky. There's a more metally subgenre of new metal that sometimes people don't really consider new metal, that might have less rapping, that might have been a little too far from other aspects of new metal to be included. But I am going to include it. And if you're including this more metally subgenre of new metal, you kind of have to have Slipknot be that band that's representing it. Slipknot was very successful, and even as their sound moved away from some of the new metal stuff and into the area of music I appreciated more, for example, their third album, where they were definitely moving away from that sound, um, was was definitely not new metal anymore. I really, really enjoyed it. The Subliminal Verses Volume 3. Very much enjoyed it. And they've continued to experiment in their sound since then. It's hard to think of them as new metal now, but I think you'd have to include it in here. So, Korn, Slipknot. From there, there's a lot of rapping in new metal, right? In a significant amount of new metal, there's rapping. And if you're thinking about rapping new metal, the biggest act and the most successful act, and maybe not the most respected act, and certainly not the most, I guess, the act with the most longevity was Limp Bizkit, right? Limp Bizkit was absolutely huge, and it's probably a little insulting of everyone that listened to new metal at one point in time to pretend that wasn't the case, right? So representing the rap stuff and just the fact that they were super successful, Limp Bizkit. So there's three. Who's the fourth one supposed to be? Well, you're going to have to make some cuts here. There's an entire industrial side that people consider part of new metal that I might not consider it as much of a part of new metal, like Static X, or sometimes people even include Nine Inch Nails here. I don't know why the time frame's kind of off on that. But Static X is really kind of known for one big album, and that's about it when it comes to like super, super success. So let's toss that one aside. You could probably put Papa Roach here. It's a lot of rapping sounds. They were very successful. They had great longevity, even though they'd moved away from that sound after a certain period of time. But we're kind of already representing that with Limp Bizkit, so we won't put Papa Roach in here. System of a Down is a wildly respected act, but I wouldn't consider them new metal. They were definitely peaking around the same time, but I just don't consider them a new metal band. So one of my favorite bands, but I don't think it fits in a big four of nu metal. And I think if you ask them, they wouldn't consider themselves nu metal either. You could have things like Deftones in here, but I don't think they're on the same level of success as a different band I could be thinking of. Same thing with POD or whoever. I think if you're going to be serious about the most successful nu metal bands ever, you're going to have to say Linkin Park. Now, Linkin Park doesn't make you think of nu metal sometimes, but if you think of a song like One Step Closer to the Edge or whatever its actual title is, like that's about as close as it's going to sound like to Limp Bizkit, and there are some similarities. Now, there's some instrumental stuff on their first couple albums and more electronic stuff on their first couple albums, especially later on in their career too, that makes you not think of nu metal as much. But it was considered in the category, and it definitely sounded like it at some points in time. And they sold just a butt ton of copies of those first couple albums. So, and they had continued success after that. So I'm saying that's probably your big four of nu metal: Slipknot, Linkin Park, Korn, and Limp Bizkit. Um, I'm not a giant Limp Bizkit fan, but I definitely appreciate that they were popular at one point in time. So I'm going to put them on the bottom of my rankings. And if I'm honest with myself, I've listened to way too much Slipknot and own way too many like actual full Slipknot CDs to consider myself anything other than a big Slipknot fan. So I didn't really listen to their first couple albums too. I am kind of like a later Slipknot fan, where they got a little more, I think, creative and kind of different with their singing and their style, varied with their singing and their style. So for me, it's Slipknot number one, Linkin Park number two. Those first couple albums were really, really good. Korn number three. Korn's really good, and then Limp Bizkit's kind of my drop-off one. But I think those are the big four of nu metal. I'm curious to hear what your opinions are on the subject because there's so many big nu metal bands, and your big four might be totally different because you might not even agree on what nu metal is. So drop me your big four in the comments section if you so desire.